So here lately, it's been my very sincere pleasure to talk about the ongoing infighting that is plaguing the Republican Party. Number one, because it's fun. There's a lot of schadenfreude here. Number two, because historically speaking, it's relatively rare, right? So typically we expect the Democratic Party to be the one that's prone to infighting because it's the Big Ten party. It's this loose coalition of broadly aligned interests. And Democratic leaders in the past have commented that leading the Democratic Party is like herding cats, right? President Obama famously referred to the left in general and the Democrats in particular as a circular firing squad. And we've seen that manifest time and time and time again. Whereas the Republican Party has this authoritarian bent in it that predisposes it towards falling in line behind a particular leader. And if you look at the roster of Republican leaders in the past 20 years, you see that, right? So the GOP leader for years was President Bush, and then it went to John McCain when he ran against President Obama in 2008, then Mitt Romney when he ran against President Obama in 2012, and then finally Donald Trump. And each time, the leadership is basically thrown out the last guy for the sake of the new guy. Like Donald Trump famously hated and disrespected John McCain because John McCain recognized Donald Trump as this hilariously corrupt and unprincipled actor. And because the GOP was behind Trump, they also tolerated and very often encouraged the denigration of somebody like John McCain, right? That's how authoritarian these are, right? The famous saying is that the Democratic Party falls in love, the Republicans fall in line. But here lately we've seen the script flip a bit, right? So the Democratic Party, believe it or not, relatively speaking, has its shit together, right? Under the leadership of President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, the Democratic Party has been, for the most part, fairly united. Even with renegade members like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who have been, a pain in the ass to Biden and the Democrats at critical junctures, for the most part, even they, 8 or 9 times out of 10, fall in line. And the Progressive Caucus, too. They're depicted as these wild contrarians, but for the most part, people like AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal and Bernie Sanders, they have also fallen in line behind the president's agenda. The Democratic Party, relatively speaking, is firing on all cylinders, and the GOP is falling apart at the seams. And that's good, typically, for Democrats and for the country, because, of course, a disunified GOP is much less dangerous and much less of a threat to the country and to Democrats. But we are in a bit of a weird situation here because right now what we've got is the need to pass a budget. Okay, so every year Congress has to pass a budget to fund the federal government. The Constitution empowers Congress with the power of the purse. The president still has to sign off on budgets, so the president, is still relatively powerful. But ultimately, funding derives from Congress. And it seems like the threat of government shutdown is frequently used, and both parties have used it. Both parties have threatened government shutdown. But famously, Republicans are more inclined to, push that button, right? It happened under Speaker Gingrich during the Clinton administration. It happened famously again in 2013 when Republicans, under the influence of the Tea Party, threatened government shutdown to try to defund Obamacare. And then it happened in 2018 and 2019 under President Trump when the Republicans and Democrats basically agreed on a spending bill, but it didn't include funding for Trump's border wall. And Trump caught shit from right-wing news outlets and commentators and was basically like, hey, Donald, I can't believe you're backing off on this. You're a pansy. And so he dug his heels in and threatened to veto any budget that didn't include funding for his border wall, and that put Republicans in an awkward place. So anyway, this seems to be, relatively speaking, a Republican problem, certainly in modern history. Well, history is repeating itself because we are in the middle of, we're at the very end of a continuing resolution, basically a stopgap measure to try to buy Congress and the government some additional time to come up with a budget. And it expires tomorrow. Friday is when this continuing resolution ends, and Congress has to approve a budget and send it to the president for signature. But here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not really Republicans fighting with Democrats, it's Republicans fighting with Republicans. So Senate Republicans, for the most part, are behind a congressional $1.77 trillion spending bill, which includes government funding and also, I think, funding for Ukraine. Senate Republicans are mostly behind this. It's House Republicans that are not behind this. And as a matter of fact, they have actively threatened members of their own party. So it says, Axios reported in a letter to Senate Republicans on Monday, 13 current and incoming House conservatives, including the 5 Never Kevin members, issued a threat to Senate Republicans. We are obliged to inform you that if any omnibus passes in the remaining days of this Congress, where Democrats still technically have control, right? That doesn't expire until January. House Republicans will oppose and whip opposition to any legislative priority of those senators who vote for this bill, including the Republican leader. So again, they're saying, hey, look, we're going to get the majority in January, and if you pass this $1.7 trillion funding bill, now, when we take the majority in the House in January, we will punish you politically, even if you're a Republican, right? And the favored speaker, or the favorite candidate for speaker, which is Kevin McCarthy, and we've talked about it, he still doesn't have the support that he needs to guarantee his speakership. He's still desperate to get the support that he needs. He endorsed the letter Tuesday morning, tweeting, "Agreed, except no need to whip. When I'm speaker, their bills will be dead on arrival in the House if this nearly $2 trillion monstrosity is allowed to move forward." So Kevin McCarthy is saying if he becomes speaker, and then he will just not allow legislative priorities of Republicans, not just Democrats. That's bad enough. That's bad faith and bad pool and dirty pool enough, but we typically expect that of Republicans. Republicans are threatening other Republicans. And this has happened quite often during the Biden administration, because Senate Republicans, for the most part, have been relatively bipartisan with President Biden. I mean, not really, but compared to how they were under President Obama, it's been night and day. And House Republicans have been more reactionary, more deranged, and they have repeatedly threatened their Senate counterparts for backing Biden legislation. I think it happened even under the infrastructure bill. Like they went on, people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, went on Fox News when Senate Republicans backed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And they were like, I can't believe that they gave Biden, that these Republicans have given Biden a political victory. They're rhinos. How dare they? We're going to primary them. We're going to punish them. So this really isn't anything new, but it's cropping up again. And, Senator McConnell and a lot of other Republican senators say that they're brushing this aside, that they're not taking the threat super seriously. I think at one point, McCarthy needs to be in a position to get as many votes as he can. He's got to say that to keep his people together, but I just don't think it's a strong statement. I think it's an idle threat, but I hope Kevin becomes speaker, says Senator Capito. Senate Minority Whip John Thune and John Cornyn and Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell, they basically like, yeah, Kevin, whatever. But yeah, it's interesting because, again, it just goes to show how the GOP really is in the midst of this horrific identity crisis, right? They've got a notoriously corrupt and unpopular leader in the form of Donald Trump. Kevin McCarthy is considered spineless and weak and held hostage by the more radical members of the House Republican Party. You've got people like Mitch McConnell who are hardly saints or beacons of political good faith, but are much more strategic and measured in how they approach their bad faith than somebody like McCarthy. So it's just this whole smorgasbord of chaos. And normally, again, that's good for the Democrats and it's good for the country because a shattered GOP is less dangerous. But right now, we really got to pass this budget or risk a government shutdown. And the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, they've got a good article about what you need to know about government shutdowns. Like what goes into it, what continuing resolutions are. It's a pretty good article, and this is a conservative source. And I say this as a proud lefty, somebody who typically doesn't like conservative sources, but they have a pretty good article about it. And like even things like Social Security, right? So if the government shuts down, if we don't get funding, people still probably get their Social Security checks, but enrollment for eligible seniors who are now entitled to receive Social Security, they still have to enroll. those would be delayed. So many services across this country would be delayed. And of course, it would totally screw over federal employees. So yeah, this is a big deal, and it's becoming a common thing. And the GOP, the saner members of the GOP, really need to have a bit of a mutiny and take control of the ship. But I'm not confident that that'll happen. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, maybe there'll be another Republican-led or Republican-triggered government shutdown, and everybody should kind of prepare themselves accordingly. Hey, you. Yeah, you. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope that you did, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe. Also, my link tree is in the description below, so if you have a sec, go ahead and share the love on all my social media accounts. Also, if you want to express an opinion, eternal devotion, or undying contempt, go ahead and leave a comment because we're always looking for feedback. And on that note, I look forward to pondering politics and pop culture again with you very soon.